Welcome to the Project Endure podcast, the place where we talk about life, endurance, persistence, perspective, and so much more. I'm Joe Rinaldi, and I'll be your host. Let's jump in. Before we get started, let me just say that we get it. Personal development can be hard, but you don't have to do it alone. Project Endure has been on a mission to create a supportive and inspiring community of people, all striving to be better together. Head down to the link in the show notes and join the Hard Things Club so that we can do hard things together. And if you're already a member, invite a friend and spread the love. Now, let's get to the episode. Welcome back to the Project Endure podcast, episode 177. We have myself, Joe Rinaldi, and in Texas, we have a very, very special guest, Jeff Depew. Jeff, how are you?
We're good. Thanks for having me on. 177. It's pretty legendary. Thanks for getting me on before 200.
Of course, man. When I messaged you, I said that it was long overdue. And I meant that because my circle on social media is on the smaller side. I intentionally don't follow a whole lot of people because I want the things that I see to be meaningful. And you're one of the people I've followed for a while. And I just admire you for a lot of reasons that you probably don't know about yet. And hopefully we'll uncover that in our conversation. So I'm so excited for this. And before we dive in, I would love for you to introduce yourself to the people listening who might not have any idea who you are.
Yeah. So I would like to say I'm the same boat in terms of social following, gathering, social media. I'm a husband. I'm a dad. I live in Texas. I've got a wonderful wife and two kids. A little bit of kind of personal background there. I grew up outside of Chicago. Had the chance and opportunity to go out to Southern California to join my brother and swim Division III. But that's kind of a lifetime ago from when I look at things in terms of just everything in life that's happened beyond the swimming pool. So I had a rather successful collegiate career, 3 national championships, I think 16-time All-American. And then that was a vast majority of my life for, 16, 17 years, ended up coaching for 3 years beyond that. And then my girlfriend and now wife, Ellie, and I decided to leave Southern California and come across to Central Texas, where we've kind of made roots and started our family in Central Texas area over the last 6 years. And then in terms of kind of the endurance and athlete side of myself, being the collegiate swimmer, transitioned outside of 25 yards, picked up running, and slowly over the last 2 years, I would definitely say I've been missing the pool. So I have said that I will be a forever triathlete.
I love it. So I have a couple questions. One would be about swimming in specific. I just want to point out that you are a very humble person. You said 16-time All-American. That's pretty impressive. Is that something that means a lot to you at this point in your life, or something that meant a lot and you've moved on from?
So, yeah, I definitely think it was one of those things growing up. I would just say I was in a very competitive environment from a very young age. I grew up on a cul-de-sac, and I was like the second youngest of like 13 kids. So I was always looking forward to like hanging out with my older brother. We're about 2 years apart, hanging out with all of his friends, doing all those things. So I grew up in just, the next up mindset of being like, well, I want to play with them. And the only rule was when I was growing up is there was no crying and no complaining. If that happened, then it ruined the game for everyone. So I knew if I wanted to, be someone who played with everyone that was older than me, I knew I needed to step my game up, so to say. So, in terms of the accolades, I was faced with just the expectation that I feel like I knew I could have done that, and the work that went into winning national championships, talking with my coach, my assistant coach, strength and conditioning, everyone kind of played a part and a role in it, and surrounding myself with wonderful teammates. It was more or less the kind of result that I had expected. I want to say that humbly, and it was definitely something in the back of my mind personally I knew I could have achieved. And long story short, I won my freshman, sophomore, junior year. Senior year, go my fastest time ever, and I ended up getting fourth in the
Ooh.
same event that I had won the 3 years prior. So it was one of those weird scenarios, but I think the sport of swimming really transcended over the course of the time that I was there. So it was really cool to see, and it's almost 10 years removed now from everything, and I think it was, it's cool to have a good talking point, but it's not something that I carry with me on my chest on a daily basis.
Hmm. I appreciate that answer for a few reasons. I think one, it was apparent in the way you introduced yourself that titles, accolades, achievements might not be the first place where your brain goes, because you introduce yourself as a husband and a father rather than this is what I do for work, or this is who I was or am as an athlete. So you led with that, which I appreciate. There's also this idea of expecting a lot from ourselves, having high standards that I'd love to dive into a little bit, because the people who listen to this podcast are people who are striving for things. They care about growth and they have high standards. And I think sometimes high standards can set us up for many disappointments that if we don't approach with the right perspective can lead to bigger discouragements and can stall progress. So I want to circle back to that. I also just want to highlight the fact that you had your best year, your fourth year, from a numbers standpoint.
Yeah.
From an internal standpoint, you performed the best you ever had, and yet the outcome was, I guess, the worst out of those 4 years
Yeah.
from an outcome standpoint. And that's just, it's, I guess, funny to look back on now. I'm sure at the time it didn't feel funny, but it's just one of those things about life that sometimes you can give your absolute best, and based on other circumstances outside of your control, it just doesn't lead to the outcome that maybe you had hoped for.
Exactly. Yeah. And I think going into that meet senior year, I knew it was going to be a really competitive race. And it was the first night of the race, like the NCAA championships. And so I was always used to starting off with a bang, coming home with a trophy, big smiles, everything of that nature. We were a relatively small team when it came to swimming at NCAAs. And my senior year, I was the only individual for our team. So it was like, okay, well, there were still 2 other days of competition I needed to get through. So it was one night sleep and then kind of get up, put yourself, move forward, and not overanalyze what you could have done. And it was an insanely close race, which was like, looking back on it, it took me like a week or two to be like, okay, well, like what went right, what went wrong. I was like, I literally swam as right as I could, and it just didn't happen. And so it was like one of those things where I was just like, oh, should I have taken a stroke off here? Should I have gone out a little bit faster? And at the end of the day, I was just like looking at my cumulative splits over the, 8 years of the race that I had swam the 200 IM. And I was like, I literally put everything together as best as I could. And it wasn't championship caliber, but it was, record caliber. And I think that was my end result, going into senior year, was just when I wanted to leave the pool, I could leave knowing that I put my heart and soul into something over the 17 years that when I left the pool, I didn't need to come back.
Ooh.
That was my retirement. Was I finished my last race, I got out, hugged my coach, and I knew that I didn't need to come back because I left everything in there.
There's this phrase, empty the bucket, that I really like, because the imagery, it just to visualize, a bucket at the beginning of each day, being able to pour out everything in that bucket and feeling proud that you gave your best effort, being able to put your head on the pillow knowing you did your best, regardless of the outcome. It feels really good. And to expand that over a 17-year swimming career and to be able to say I left the pool not needing to go back in is so powerful. And to go back then to the idea of standards, right? You hold yourself to a high standard, and a lot of people listening feel the same. How did you keep yourself from letting the disappointments hold you back when you fell short of those standards and expectations throughout your swim career?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'm Mr. Optimistic, Mr. Positive, and I always try to minimize the risk of over exceeding or putting too much pressure on myself. I think it's just those small little buckets of going through a process in order to reap the results of what you put together over the course of time. So swimming taught me a lot, and kind of transitioning beyond the pool into endurance sports, whether it's triathlon or running, half marathons, marathons. As much as you can wake up one morning and say, "Hey, this is something I want to do," yeah, you can, but there's a certain work and result that most cases people want to push themselves to. So as much as I can say I can wake up one morning and go run a marathon, yes, I can, but is it going to be to the best efforts of what I envision myself doing? And much like you did your Philly Stairmaster of Rocky, I'm sure there was a lot of prep and weightlifting and everything else under the sun that you envisioned yourself going through and seeing the end result at the end of the day, right? There was a lot of mental preparation as well as physical preparation that needs to go into the result of going through 24 hours. And I'm sure it was a rather dark time to get through, probably hours 18 to 22. Much like a course for a marathon, it's one of those things where it really comes down to how mentally tough, but also how you can flip disappointments into gathering information and creating positivity out of it.
Mm. So I think in terms of analogies quite often, and I love finance. It's just been a passion of mine. I followed the stock market since I was in middle school. And I don't know if there's a better visualization to me than looking at a stock. Let's take Apple, for example, that over the course of the past 20 years has just ripped higher up and to the right. But through those 20 years, there are drawbacks, right? 10% down, 20% down. There's panic, there's fear, there's doubt in the minds of many. And yet it continues to move up and to the right, and it's choppy. And that's how I visualize the tough days, right? It's like, oh, down 5%, we're on a dip. It's a bad day in the red. It doesn't mean it's over. It doesn't mean that that has to be the final direction and destination. We have a chance to turn it around every single day with the work we put in. And those ups and downs are just part of the process. There's this amazing quote from Ryan Holiday that I'll read that really speaks to me. He said, "Work is finding yourself alone at the track when the weather kept everyone else indoors. Work is pushing through the pain and the crappy first drafts and prototypes. It is ignoring whatever platitudes others are getting, and more importantly, ignoring whatever platitudes you may be getting, because there is work to be done." And it's that idea of doesn't matter if you won, doesn't matter if you lost, doesn't matter what the weather's like or if it's a good day or a bad day. You're committed to showing up and doing the work because I hope you've fallen in love with the process and also you see the benefit long term.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's, that hits the nail right on the head too. And I know that's another analogy for you there. Uh, it, I think the work, so many people want that instant gratification of either likes, comments, followings, whatever the case may be. Like I rarely post as much as I think I should on social media, because at the end of the day, when I want to post something or when I want to do something, it's who is this for? How is this going to help either motivate, inspire, or like give positivity out into the world? And so I definitely think it is one of those scenarios too, where it has shifted from how can I show up on a day-to-day basis for my family? And if I don't, Ellie will probably laugh at this, but like if I don't get my workout in, I'm always trying to figure out a way in the day to get my workout done. So that's why I'm like, okay, she recognizes that I'm a much better person after I get all of my, my best thoughts come from post workout runs where I come home, I'm like, hey, I was thinking on my run. She goes, oh, okay. All right, let me sit down for this idea. But it just makes me a better person, I think, individually, and holistically in terms of professional and personal, and being a better individual for my family, I think is definitely something where the process is meant to progress over time. It's never going to be linear.
Yeah. So I'll add two things. One is I think the work is more about who we become and less about the outcome. And when you're able to detach a bit from the outcome and focus on who you're becoming, the work becomes a bit more enjoyable. Maybe it becomes more meaningful for most people as well. And then I guess the other part of all of this, at least for me, is when I think of the work, I think of what is the most important thing that I can be doing to not only become the person I need to become, but also to serve the people who are closest to me who matter the most. And there's this phrase that, okay, I'll say this on the podcast. I've said it before. A lot of what I share is not original to me. I'll take a quote from here or a thought from there. I will say, I think this next line is something that came from my mind, which I'm proud
All
of.
right.
All right. Sometimes you need to be selectively selfish in order to be sustainably selfless. And
Yeah,
it's that idea, right? Like I'm a better person when I take the extra hour to do this thing that I need to do for me. And
exactly.
and for you and me, that's fitness. I'm sure for other people listening, it could be fitness. It might be something different. But it's nice to hear that as someone who has a family, you still carve out time for those things. I don't want to spoil anything. One of the questions I'm going to ask you later is about some of your running endeavors. So I'll hold that.
Okay.
But
Fair,
uh,
fair.
but we'll jump into one of the deeper questions, and I ask this to everybody. But when you look back at your life so far, Jeff, and you reflect, what's the hardest thing that you've ever had to handle that you yourself did not get to choose? So something that happened to you.
Um, I know you sent this question to me beforehand, and I think one of the things that was truly out of our control, and my control, was after our son was born. I'll preface it by saying he's happy, he's healthy, he's 2 now, but when he was about 3 weeks old, he had a very severe case of RSV, rhinovirus, and a couple of other things where it was he couldn't breathe. And at 3 weeks old, he was maybe breathing out of 50% of his lung capacity. We knew something was wrong, so um, my wife had to take him to the ER. They said, well, he's too little. We can't do anything for him. So they rushed him in an ambulance in an incubator to the intensive care for regional medical group.
Mm,
And it was over the holidays, it was over Thanksgiving. And so he had spent 10 days in the NICU. And that was something we obviously, when you come home as a parent, you never want to have your child suffer more than, you know, anything, because being so young, he didn't have a voice. He couldn't tell us that there was something wrong.
mm,
And you as a parent try to do what's best for your kids on a hour by hour basis, let's be honest. Um, but that was something that really pulled our family together. That's something that really pulled our faith and our commitment to each other together. But that's definitely something I would never wish upon anyone or any parent. And he became healthy and was able to overcome. And those 10 days, they weren't necessarily dark, but they were very bleak. He was able to recover on his own, but it was on his time. And I really had to pause and put together what are my priorities and how can I best serve, them, them being my family. And it just made the second Thanksgiving that Evan was there even more special because that was the final holiday. We were able to celebrate Christmas together his first year. He was only about 6.5 weeks old. But I think that next Thanksgiving was something that I truly cherished because it was, the first one with a family of four that we were able to healthily enjoy.
mm. Thank you for sharing that, Jeff. I I can't imagine what that must have been like. And the thought that comes to mind, and I hope this is relatable to everyone, is that, you know, there are things in life that feel important or urgent or they stress us, career stuff, finances, relationship stuff, um, the day-to-day small minute things, and they can feel really, really big. I would imagine for you that when Evan went to the hospital with the ICU, nothing else really mattered in your mind for those 10 days.
No, and we wanted to make sure that there was always going to be someone there with him. So whether it was my wife and I switching, and we had Julia at home, or one of our in-laws going up, he was never alone. And I think that was one of the things that, um, as a unit and as a family, and the NICU nurses were quite funny. They're like, "Oh yeah, you have the baby." Well, yeah, I mean, in the NICU, there are preemies, there are way worse health issues present during that. So it's a very somber, but the NICU nurses are true angels to take care of our son and everyone there that's needing the care. And so um, he was able to graduate after 10 days, but those 10 days were, what can I do? How can I help? And even just being there physically, because I'm someone that needs to go out all the time, but to really pause and just be present, I think is something that I took away from that, and never take a day for granted, because, the unfortunate reality is our son got to leave the NICU. But in some cases, for some families, that's not the reality. So that's why I think we were blessed in the time that we have, to really slow down and make it very intentional about the way that we can celebrate every day, but holidays and everything and beyond that.
Yeah. I was having a conversation with a client earlier this morning before this conversation, and the client I was speaking with shared this journal prompt that they had come across. And the journal prompt was, write about something that could have happened in your life but didn't. And they looked back on their own life, and they wrote about how they almost lost someone close to them but they didn't, right? And similar to what you're speaking about, right, the worst case scenario didn't play out, right? I think a lot of times we dismiss those things once they pass us, and we take for granted the fact that worse things haven't happened. And I think this is a really good reflection point for anyone listening. And if you're listening and this feels like it's resonating, maybe pause and journal on that yourself, think about that yourself. But, what are all the times in life that we've been really, really fortunate that we kind of just brush under the rug or leave behind us because we're good now? And I think it's important to reflect on that, because we are all so fortunate and so, lucky to have the opportunities that we all have to just live and breathe. The other part of this thought goes to an analogy again to the world of sports. And, if you think of a game, we can use hockey as an example because that's the context it was first explained to me. When you're watching a game of hockey, there's a certain pace to it, right? There's some patience, there's some strategy. And, let's say the game ends in a tie and it goes to overtime. Well, the pace of overtime is faster. There's more urgency, there's more intentionality because there's a lot on the line. And this analogy came from someone who almost lost their life, actually went into cardiac arrest, died, and was brought back to life. And they spoke about how they were living their life on overtime. They had this new sense of urgency, of intentionality, of pace that they were playing the game of life with. And they didn't take any of it for granted, because if the other team scored, the game is over, just like that. And I think it's a really good reminder that we're lucky to be here, and we shouldn't take life for granted because it's precious.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that was, I think the slow down pace to realize, as fast as we've created life and wanted to push our foot on the accelerator, it's always good to put on cruise control every once in a while and just understand what's around you, and being grateful for that. And I think the unfortunate circumstances that we had to go through with Evan, allowed us to, at least myself, put in the perspective that he was able to persevere, and get healthy. But also, health is something that we can never take truly for granted until you don't have it anymore. And being able and functioning and having my own two legs, two arms, and being able to have a roof under my head, those necessities, and needs and wants in life are easy to decipher.
Yeah, there's a saying that the healthy man has many problems, the sick man has just one. And
Yep.
yeah, if you don't have your health, there's really you don't have a lot of other things. And so yeah, good reminder not to take it for granted. And with that being said, I'd love to transition more toward what you do in terms of using your health and pushing yourself. So I'll ask this question, and I am curious where you take it. If you don't take it where I think you're going to take it, I'll ask a different question later. But
Fair.
when you look back at your life to this point, what's the hardest thing you've ever done on purpose, and why did you do that thing?
I mean, uh, I really I I like I don't know how to say, like, maybe it's just the commitment to fitness. I told myself after I left the pool and the kind of coaching scene of things, I was like, I'm never gonna set my alarm clock with a 4 in front of it, because I used to get in the water at 5:15 in the morning, all throughout high school, and then into college it was closer to 6. But I was like, I'm never gonna set my alarm with a 4 on it. I just don't want to do that. So I think one of the hardest things I did is I wake up at 4 now. I've been doing it for almost about a year and a half. 4:05 is when the alarm comes off, just because I'm like, I know there are times where I'm slowly waking up and I don't want to see a 3. But I know in the life that I'm currently living right now, I think family is the most important thing. And I want to be able to prioritize my time with my family. And so I think one of the quote unquote hardest things that I've forced myself to do was figure out a time to have for myself. Much like we've talked about earlier, is just compounding into being better individual, a better husband, a better dad, a better coworker. But it all starts with that foundational skill of, can I wake up in the morning and get myself to work out, get myself to sweat, because everything else beyond that is something that I would like to say comes a little easier after I've sweated and got gathered my thoughts for the day.
So
Was
I can
that was that what you were hoping for?
Yeah, yeah. You know what? I wasn't necessarily hoping, because I would have asked the question either way. But it is what I thought you would say. And where I want to get more specific is you have now run a half marathon at least once a month, every month for what month is this?
I think that was I did 68. So a little, I'm going pushing close to 6 years now. And I think that was a weird goal that started during, I think, my very intentional prep to run a sub 3 hour marathon. And I was like, wait, I'm running like every weekend close to, 12, 14, 15, 16 miles. I'm like, that's a lot of miles. And when I finished my marathon, I was like, well, maybe I just do a marathon every month. And I'm like, that's a lot of running. What if I don't like it anymore? But I built up enough fitness where I run anywhere between 20 to 35 miles a week. And one of those days over the weekend is, I run a half marathon. So it's lasted longer than our marriage so far. And it started, I think, I guess that would be April of 2019. So it's coming up, I guess, on 6 years here in a couple months.
Wow. So, as someone who has a run streak of at least a mile a day, I can appreciate that on, I think, a different level. And I think what you do might even be is more impressive in my mind, because a mile is not that challenging in the grand scheme of things. However, it's the art of showing up. That's what I want to get to.
Exactly. Yep.
It's the art of showing up and doing what you said you would do. And so what I want to hear is, have there been any months where this has almost slipped by? It's the 31st at 11 at 10 p.m. and you are like, "Oh my goodness, I haven't done it yet." Yeah. Have there been any of those?
No, there was a case over the summer this year where it was I had a trip out to California to go see my brother, and a baby shower for my sister-in-law, and I knew I wanted to run it there because Texas summers are a drag, heat and humidity. So I was like, all right, cool. I'm going to be out in Southern California. Weather's going to be a little bit nicer. I can manage the suck for, an hour and 30 to an hour and 40 minutes and get my half marathon done. Well, I wasn't familiar with their roads where he lived, and I sprained my ankle on like mile 2.
Oh,
And so I was like, okay, I could either stop and run it back, but I think it was like in the beginning part of the month, and I'm like, or I'm just gonna jog it out a little bit and see what happens. And so I ended up running like, I think, a mile and a half loop, and I just slowed down every single time, and I ended up getting like almost like a baseball size swelling on my ankle, which was not something that I should have done, looking at it. And luckily, it was like the beginning of the month. So I had like 2 weeks of very downtime running, and the swelling went down and everything, and did a lot of PT work to get back up to speed. And then I think I think June. So then July, I took it towards the end of the month. So I had almost like a 6 week buffer where I had time to play with it, but I carve out that buffer if I need to, where it's not an official race every month, but it's definitely something where uh, I make it very intentional. There was that has been the closest scare to this streak that I've had.
Okay, so as someone who would answer this question a certain way, I'm curious how you'll answer the question. Is there a scenario down the road where the streak stops?
Ooh. Uh, I don't I don't really know. I haven't thought of that. I think if I were to tackle like a marathon a month, I would have quit. I would have definitely stopped just because of the sheer pounding, and I think a half marathon is a very healthy distance to work towards and maintain, but also not take up too much extra life of time out of the day. Whereas marathon could anywhere be 3, 4 plus hours plus the prep plus all the long weekends to get to that kind of maintenance point. Um, but I'm not going to say it's forever, but it's definitely something that I'm like, all right, it's a streak. We're going to make it apparent and we're going to keep going until, I definitely see over 100 plus months, 200 plus months. Who knows? But I feel like running has given me so much of an outlet, and joy where, I like being able to version 68 on my Strava, and next month will be version 69, and I'm actually doing a race, so it'll hopefully be fast.
I was at a retreat a year and a half ago, where it was a year ago, and I had been asked about the run streak, and so I shared I was at that point maybe on day 600 something, and the guy who had asked me wasn't impressed at all by it. Like, so he had asked me, and sometimes when I talk about it, people will react with, "Oh my goodness, that's crazy." And he very calmly said, I've been running a mile every single day since 1975 outside. and
Yeah,
uh and I was like, oh my gosh, I want to be that guy. So the year, 2065 comes along, and my grandchild is telling their friend, my grandpa's run outside every single day since 2021. Um, and there's just something about that. My point here is I think that, to me, what's impressive is being able to do something over a very long period of time that you care about and that you commit to. I think, again, marriage is a great example of that. Um, I'll say that marriage to me is probably the most important streak I'll ever have in my life, right? It's like,
yes, of course.
and that's not something that you get accolades for. It's not something you get praise for. It's just something that matters a whole lot.
Right.
And so, yeah, I think it's that longevity. It's playing life in decades and not days. And where I see a lot of people get caught up, in fitness, in business, and life, and everywhere, is just looking at things on too short of a time frame. It's like, oh, that was a tough day or a tough week or a tough month, and letting that consume them, letting that change the direction of the long term, when in reality it's the ups and downs, and as long as you keep showing up, that's what matters. So I love the fact that you do that every month, and I'm excited to see that hit 100 someday.
Will do. I don't know what the exact month will be, but it'll be there. I'll maybe a post about it.
Yeah, yeah. So, with that being said, before I ask the next question that I hit every guest with, I want to ask about one of the lines in your Instagram bio. I think it might be the only line in your Instagram bio that is a full thought, which it stuck out to me, and it says, "Living a bucket list life to the fullest." So, I want to hear more about what that means to you. I think the phrase bucket list gets thrown around, and I'd love to hear, yeah, why that's there.
Yeah. So, gosh, I didn't even know that it was still up there. So you caught me off guard. Um, so I actually in college took one of the most meaningful classes that I've ever taken. It was called Real World 101. It was not a required course, which I think is beyond my capacity. I think that's something that should be, it was about goal setting. It was about,
Hmm.
how do you get your first apartment? What does it look like to own a savings account? Things that you should know in the real world. And we had a guest speaker come in, and we were tasked with a homework assignment of creating a bucket list. And a lot of my classmates took it to heart, but I took it very intentional because I knew it was going into my senior year of college. So I was like, man, like I have to think about what life is going to look like. And for so long, it was, wake up, eat, go to the pool, go to school, do homework, go to the pool, sleep, repeat for so long. And I was like, this is the first time in my life that I'm actually going to have a choice as to where I want to go and how I want to view and keep my life going. Um, and just being an athlete myself, I'm someone that loves to cross things off of a list, much like yourself, I'm sure. Um, so there's a list of, I have not checked it in a while, but on that list was actually run a half marathon and run a marathon, because I'd never run over like a 5K in my life. And the thought of running 26.2 miles scared me. But it was one of those things where I was just like, I want them to be manageable. One of them was like donate blood. One of them was help someone cross something off of their bucket list. Yeah, and being able to make enough money to invest, being able to make enough money to send my kids to college, have kids, raise them right. So I broke them out into different categories. I'm a big sports guy, so there's a lot of sports and entertainment. So one was like go to the World Cup, go to the Tour de France, like go to the Olympics. Whereas like, I, as much as I talked with my brother, I was like, oh yeah, that'd be so cool. I was like, all right, I'll write it down. So I really want to be able to, and I think I'll have to check. I've hit like over 20, but probably less than 30 things. Um, but some of them are just the longevity of things, being able to retire, being able to know that I raised my kids right, which will hopefully pan out for the better. But yeah, living a bucket list life to the its fullest. I think, if it's a list and it's a bucket, you have to fill those things with joy, but also curiosity. And I think that's what keeps me moving towards living a fruitful and happy life. Is yes, I go to work every day, 5 days a week in the office, but it's what do I looking forward to, and how do I get to spend that time with my family, and creating that next thing. As wonderful as it is, I talked earlier about being present. I think there's always the ambition and reality that there's so much more of the world out there to explore and live. And so that's where I think the tagline came through. And thanks for putting me on the spot for that.
No, I love it. It was a great answer. And part of why I wanted to highlight that is because I'm not a big bucket list person, not because I don't think it's important. It's just never been how my mind has worked. And what I mean by that is back in 2017, my wife and I went on our first date. She didn't recognize it as a date at the time. I knew it was a date though, for
Of
sure.
course, yeah.
And in hindsight, she agrees with me, which is nice. But we were walking back from mini golf, and we were talking about things we wanted to do, and somehow the topic of bucket list came up, and I'd never made a list, and so I said at the time the only thing on my list was to be the graduation speaker at my high school alma mater. And it hasn't happened yet. I spoke at my graduate school graduation and a bunch of other things, but I hound my high school every year to be the speaker. It has not happened yet, but it will someday. But
Keyword is yet. Keyword is yet.
exactly. So, and with that being said, it's just not how my mind works, is like the big bucket list things, not because it's bad. With that being said, one of the practices that's been really helpful for me, and I want to throw this out there because maybe somebody listening finds something like this helpful as well, is this practice that I do every weekend of taking a marble and putting it into a glass bottle. And what the marble represents is all of the time that past week that I will never get back. And I'm more intentional with it some weekends more than others, depending on what's going on and where my headspace is. But the ideal is that I take some time to really meditate on and sit with how did I spend my time last week? And am I proud of the way that I spent my time? Down to the small moments of, did I hold the door for that person? Did I do the right thing when nobody was watching? Did I love my wife well? And then I put the marble in the jar and I use that as a cue to live the next week with intention. And I think the small things in life are easy to overlook. So I love the idea of the bucket list. And I also think that the small things sometimes end up being the biggest things. And I'd be curious, as an aspiring parent myself, to hear your experience with parenthood, because I would imagine some of the best moments are just those like small moments at home where something funny happens or it's just quiet and you're with your kids. And so tell me a little bit more about parenthood and what's so special about that and some of those small moments that mean a lot to you.
I think you just opened up a can of worms for another podcast here for parenting. So, uh, yeah, I think as someone who didn't really know what parenthood was going to be like, I grew up in a very, it was just my brother and I, but we had a very big extended family of cousins, and so I was always around so many other people, and having to take care of and nurture life, and understanding that you have the ability to create love and really hopefully shape for the better, the next generation. There are definitely those moments where I try not to beat my head up against the wall, or I think there's only been two instances over the last 3+ years of being a parent. I joke with Ellie, I was just like, I threw the pacifier. I was just like, I was so frustrated. And that's where you need to realize with your spouse or your significant other that you're on the same team. You want what's best for the kid. And I was just so caught up because whoever it was, I can't remember now, they just weren't falling asleep, or they weren't doing the thing that I thought they should be doing. So I was getting frustrated with myself because I'm like, I'm not being a good parent now. I can't do the things that I need to do. And I was so deep into the motion of parenting that if I would have tapped, I would have thought that they quote unquote would have won, that the kid would have won. And so I needed to see it through. Luckily, they fell asleep or did whatever they needed to do. But I was just in the heat of the moment. There's a lot of emotional tension. And so I was like, I threw the pacifier. And she's like, shoot, what? I was just like, I threw the pacifier. I put it back in. It's fine. It's clean. We're good. But I think, just those small moments do add up. My dad, so their grandpa has gotten them Strider bikes. So they're bikes without pedals,
Mhm.
for their second birthdays. And I think that was the coolest thing, was just watching them grow and do so many life things over the course of their lifetime. Is the years are short, the days are long, is a very true parental quote to have. But to see them to go from full assistance to now being able to get the food that they want from the pantry, or being able to put their helmet on to go ride their bike down the street and play with their friends. Those small moments are something that I envisioned happening as a parent. And I think those are the small joys that I'm like, wow, like this is pretty cool, to build a family and hopefully do the things that you wish you got to do as a kid in their lifetime.
I'll say this, and maybe we have another conversation at some point all about parenthood, because I would imagine there's a lot to talk about. But
There
for
is, yes. It's chaotically beautiful. It's the best way I can shape it, because our two
mm,
kids are 15 months apart. So as much as it was great to have Julie, our oldest, Evan was right behind her. And so Evan's been trying to play catch up his whole life, to play with her, be with her, run with her, do all of these other things. And we're like, come on, like you guys can play together. Well, play goes well together for 10 minutes. And then we have to, get out the referee shirt and be like, okay, like let's figure out what's going on. But yes, parenthood is chaotically beautiful at the end of the day. And it's one of those things where you can, in the heat of the moment, you're probably not laughing, but
mm.
maybe a day or two removed from the event, you can laugh at it.
So I think that someone who is just a dog parent at this point, which I know is not the same, it does not count. I think that parenthood seems like a beautiful example for all things in life, that sometimes the hardest things are the best things, right? Like the most beautiful, meaningful things in life are also the hardest more often than not. And parenthood seems like the perfect example of that.
Yeah, couldn't be truer there. And I think I had the responsibility, and I chose to have the responsibility, I guess is the better term, to I say the baseball analogy. I was the closer, so every
Mm.
night it gave Ellie her time to take a bath, unwind from the day, get to bed, and so I would always give the kids their nightcap bottle and put them down. And so that was like my mission to, hold them, nurture them, love them, and just like be in the moment with them. But then there were days where they're like, I'm going to stay up. I'm not going to eat this bottle, or I'm not going to burp, or I'm not going to go fall asleep. And I was like, you know what? I'm in the rocking chair. This is the only and most important thing that matters. Like, I would never take my phone into the nursery or anything of that nature. And there were definitely some difficult days and that I would like come check in with Ellie after I got him down. She's like, "Oh, was that a hard one?" I was like, "I'm going to shower. I'm going to get in bed and I'm going to go to sleep." She goes, "All right, just know I'm here." I'm like, "I appreciate that."
Oh, amazing. Well, so with that being said, I got two more questions. The first is about the word endurance. So, this is the Project Endure podcast. You're an endurance athlete. And very simply, when you hear the word endurance or endure, what does that mean to you?
I picked up on your podcast questions here, Joe. So I was prepared for this one. I think the word endure or endurance in my terms of regurgitating it in a different way is to marinate.
Mm,
It's as much as you can say process, perseverance, and over time. I think it's the ability to marinate on something or somewhere, or the process of marinating to go forward. And during the marinating process of meat or whatever it is, it's like you gotta kind of sit and soak everything in before it becomes better. So for me, endure or endurance is something where definitely process oriented, but you need to marinate in what you hope to become and surround yourself with the right things, tools, capabilities, and mindset to get to that end goal. So that's where it definitely compounds over time. But you almost you have to sit in that moment to realize that you need to kind of do that before you pass go.
So, with a few bonus episodes mixed in, I've recorded over 180 podcasts for this podcast episode. And I've talked about the topic of endurance with over 180 different people. I have never heard it in those terms. And I love that so much.
There you
I
go.
that is beautiful. Yeah, it's marinating in it. It's not trying to skip out on something because it's hard. It's not trying to avoid something because it's uncomfortable. It is sitting in it and marinating on the person that you want to become, marinating in the person you want to become, marinating to become the person you want to become. I don't know exactly how you phrased it, but whatever you said, Jeff, I'm gonna have to go back. I'm gonna clip that up, and I'm gonna make that my alarm each morning from now on.
Okay.
That's good.
Fair.
And so with that being said, right? So we'll move on from that question to really what is my favorite question and the final question of the podcast. And, for context, I say this every time, but it's true. There are people listening to this in all different seasons of life. Someone might be going through something hard that they chose. They might be preparing for something, training for something, pursuing something. Somebody else might be going through something that they didn't choose, something really, really hard, dark, and just uncomfortable. Whoever it is, there are people that are struggling. With that being said, if you could share a message of encouragement, of guidance to those people out there who are struggling, what would you say?
I think like go make it a great day. I think that's my little tagline that I try to attach to any kind of Instagram story after one of my runs. There are so many countless days, times, and alarm snoozes that I have where I don't want to get out of bed. And the post workout endorphins are truly flying at the end of my runs. And so when you realize you have a choice to go make a day great, and it's the small difference between being good and being great in some cases. So I hope that someone can shed light on the positivity and optimism that you can create within your own sphere of influence to go make it a great day. And at the end of the day, you do have choices in your life. In some cases, you're not able to make those choices for yourself, but hopefully they are for the better picture. And if you're going through a hard time or a great time or just a good time, you realize that there's always going to be something that you can reflect on in the present that you should be grateful for. And I think that's something that I try to live with on a day-to-day basis in order to like literally go make it a great day. So I think that's something that hopefully can resonate with anyone and everyone, whatever season of life that they're going through. Is at the end of the day, you have a choice. And when you wake up, you have a choice. And hopefully that choice is to go make it a great day.
And I think that's the perfect note to end on. I hope that no matter what time of day someone's listening to this, they can truly grasp the fact that they still have a choice to make it a great day, even if it's, 6 p.m., because that choice happens over and over, and it truly is within our control. And so with that being said, Jeff, if people want to reach out or connect or just follow along with your journey, where's the best place for people to do that?
Yeah, my Instagram I think is Jeff, and I think it's two underscores because the first Instagram I made was one underscore, and it's my last name Depew, Depew. And then I do have a TikTok, which I don't really share. I've started posting more on that. That's all been fitness oriented, so that's Jeff Depew too. But if you want the family content of life and parenthood, where things get rather crazy and chaotic but beautiful, my Instagram. If you're looking for something more fitness oriented, it's my TikTok. I try to post when I can, but I also try to be present. And I think those are my two main avenues of connecting with other individuals and creating an online community. But if you feel like you want to give me a follow, that's totally fine. If you just want to observe from afar, totally okay as well.
Well, I will say this. I think if you are out there listening, looking for an encouraging, humble presence in your life from someone who shows up and does the work, give Jeff a follow, reach out, say hi. And Jeff, I really appreciate this conversation and just you as a person. So thank you for this. It means a lot. If you enjoyed this episode of the Project Indoor podcast, go ahead and subscribe, leave a review on your platform of choice, and share this episode with a friend. It helps us get more conversations like this out to more people like you. We appreciate you, and we'll talk to you next time. And one more thing. If you're looking for a community of people all striving to be better together, check out the Project Indoor Hard Things Club. The link is in the description below. We'd love to have you.